Nintendo has a long storied history of innovation and success, but in addition to all their brilliant decisions, they've made quite a number of poor decisions that range from head-scratching to unbelievably dumb. Like you're telling me a multi-billion-dollar company thought this was a good idea. In the early 90s, Nintendo entered into an agreement with Sony to create a CD-based add-on for the Super Nintendo, a project that, believe it or not, was to be called the PlayStation with space in the middle. It was a golden opportunity. Sony's tech expertise combined with Nintendo's IP could have kept Nintendo at the forefront of the CD-ROM gaming revolution. Instead, Nintendo abruptly backstabbed Sony and struck a deal with Philips for a CD platform. Nintendo's decision to break off the Sony partnership in '91 was like inviting the final boss to come back in a later level, much stronger, and did that happen? Sony famously went on to create the PlayStation, of course no space in the name this time, which proceeded to bully Nintendo in the console market. Meanwhile, what did Nintendo get from partnering with Philips? The Philips CDI, an ill-fated multimedia console that was a colossal flop, and the only reason we still know about it is because it famously has some of the worst games in video game history. Like, Philips had the license to use a few Nintendo characters, resulting in games like Hotel Mario and Zelda Wand of Gamelon with laughably bad cutscenes and gameplay. These off-brand abominations did more damage to Mario and Link's reputation than 1,000 water temples ever could. In hindsight, Nintendo dumping Sony was insanely dumb. It created their biggest competitor that's still going strong today, and it tarnished their IP on the CDI. There was no real fix for this blunder, and Nintendo just had to watch Sony dominate the 5th generation of gaming, then the 6th, then finally win in the 7th before getting demolished once again with the PS4 vs Wii U. To this day, we can only wonder what might have been if Nintendo had stuck with Sony. The Wii U is a prime example of how poor marketing and a bad name can doom a great concept. Coming off the wildly successful Wii, Nintendo somehow thought it was a good idea to name its new console Wii U, a name so confusing that many people assumed it was just an add-on for the Wii. Wii 2 was literally right there. Like, imagine if the Switch 2 was called the Switch U. The reveal at E3 2011 was spectacularly bad. Nintendo of America president Reggie Fils-Aimé took the stage talking about a new controller with a screen, but they barely showed the console itself. Imagine being in the audience and thinking like, is this an accessory for the Wii? Is it a tablet controller or a whole new console? Even the gaming press was confused. People called it the worst hardware reveal in modern history, and then a year later the Xbox One had a notoriously bad presentation also, as a side note. But anyway, a video played during the reveal that only added to the confusion showed people using Wii remotes and a device that looked like the old Wii, so viewers reasonably thought the Wii U gamepad was just a fancy peripheral. The marketing never clearly explained what the Wii U was, and many consumers never figured it out. Nintendo's former president Satoru Iwata later admitted that because they put so much emphasis on the gamepad controller, there appeared to be some misunderstanding about the system's nature. And yeah, I guess you could call it an understatement. The misunderstanding never went away. The Wii U's branding was so botched that it became a textbook example of marketing failure in gaming. It's no surprise the Wii U only sold like 13 to 14 million units worldwide. The impact was enormous. Like, third parties and casual gamers alike just did not buy Wii U's, and it never took off. Nintendo did sort of fix this one by learning their lesson with the Switch. From day one, the Switch is marketed clearly like as a console handheld hybrid, and it was also marketed more towards young adults, while the Wii U was targeted towards children in its advertisements. But the Wii U remains a cautionary tale. If you launch a product people don't even know exists, and they don't know what it is, it's not going to sell. I know it's a crazy concept. Going back a generation, Nintendo made a big deal about the Wii's backwards compatibility with GameCube. Like, this was actually the first Nintendo home console to have backwards compatibility, and the original 2006 Wii could play all GameCube games and even had ports for the GameCube controllers and memory cards. This was a great feature, so naturally Nintendo decided to remove it in later Wii models. Around 2011, they released the Wii Family Edition, a streamlined redesign of the Wii meant to sit horizontally. This new Wii cut cost, and in doing so, cut out the entire GameCube functionality. Suddenly, those tiny GameCube discs and your stash of Super Smash Bros. Melee or Mario Sunshine had no use on a brand new Wii. Nintendo didn't exactly advertise this. They hoped consumers wouldn't notice, but of course people did. This move was dumb for a couple of reasons. One being backwards compatibility was a selling point that cost Nintendo goodwill when it vanished, and two, it saved only a tiny bit of manufacturing costs while annoying a lot of fans who expected the feature. Essentially, Nintendo charged the same money for less product. There was no fix except for informed buyers to hunt out an older Wii model or just use an actual GameCube, and by then the Wii U was on the horizon anyway. In hindsight, stripping out GameCube support at the end of the generation was a pointless act of just, I don't even know what to call this. It was a solution to a problem nobody had. It wasn't a disastrous decision in the long run for Nintendo, but it's just a head scratcher. Another dumb thing is how it took until the Switch 2 to finally get GameCube games back. Also, we kind of saw something similar like this with the DS and the DSi, where of course on the DS you could play Game Boy Advance games, and then the DSi got rid of it. Nintendo isn't just content to discontinue hardware, they'll also happily delete an entire entire decade of digital history. Case in point, in March 2023, Nintendo shut down the eShop online stores for the Wii U and Nintendo 3DS. This wasn't a surprise because they announced it a year in advance, but the way it was handled was just monumentally dumb and short-sighted. After March 27th, 2023, it became impossible to buy any games or DLC on those systems' digital stores. That alone is frustrating, but what makes it truly idiotic is the sheer amount of games and content that Nintendo essentially threw into the vault. There's something like around 1,000 digital-only games that effectively vanished from legitimate purchase once the eShops closed. Even classic retro games suffered, like nearly 530 virtual console games were available on those eShops, and about 335 of those were not available on the Switch's online service at the time of shutdown. In other words, Nintendo willingly wiped out access to hundreds of games, some quirky digital-only releases like some I've covered on the channel, and there was no alternative in place. Preservationists and longtime fans were rightfully upset about this, and to rub salt in the wound, in a now deleted Q&A, Nintendo decided to defend the decision by saying they had no plans to offer classic content outside of Nintendo Switch Online memberships. In other words, if you wanted to buy these old games, too bad. This move was widely panned as one of Nintendo's dumbest in modern times, effectively telling loyal fans their digital purchases exist at Nintendo's mercy. The only fix, if we could call it that, has been community efforts to archive and end up becoming the same title as the Pittsburgh baseball team. Nintendo is notorious for legal battles against emulation, piracy, and anything that involves fan games, yet they removed access to even buying a large amount of games on their systems. Also, you can still download games on the eShop you already own, so it's not like it's completely dead. Nintendo really couldn't sell codes for these games on their websites to redeem on the 3DS or Wii U, or even the Wii and DSi. Like, I feel like there's got to be a very easy way to keep these games accessible. This one still blows my mind. In 2020, for Mario's 35th anniversary, Nintendo released Super Mario 3D All-Stars on the Switch, and it was a compilation of Mario 64, Mario Sunshine, and Mario Galaxy. And that's great, right? Well, some would say it was, but a lot of others would say it's not, because Nintendo decided to make it a limited time release, both physically and digitally. They announced that the collection would only be sold from its launch in September 2020 until March 31st, 2021, after which it would be delisted from the eShop and no more copies would be shipped. Yes, Nintendo intentionally created an artificial 6-month window to buy a digital game. And this was for no good reason whatsoever. Like, fans were justifiably baffled. Why would a digital product be pulled from sale? Like, okay, fine, you want to make the physical copy limited edition, you want to drive sales for that, but digitally? This move was just so dumb that people still don't understand it. Nintendo never provided a coherent explanation, simply framing it as a special anniversary celebration period. What's likely the correct answer is that this was like a Disney Vault style FOMO tactic. It created a sense of urgency to drive sales, and indeed, Super Mario 3D All-Stars sold over 8 million copies by March 2021. So maybe Nintendo laughed all the way to the bank, but the goodwill loss was huge. They lost years of sales. Like, this game has been off the eShop for over 4 years now, so think about how many people would have bought it in that time. Like, people who were not able to get this game while it was out for whatever reason just hated this. Like, you can still buy the physical copy, but it's just super expensive. It didn't help that after March 2021, to this day, Nintendo still hasn't fixed this issue. All-Stars remains unavailable on the eShop, and you could play 64 through Nintendo Switch Online, and Mario Galaxy was finally remastered along with Galaxy 2. But Sunshine is not on the Switch currently. At least it's not on the Switch 2 yet, I should say, until it comes out in Nintendo Switch Online. I just think limited time releases of a digital game is just kind of absurd. Like I said, make the physical game limited edition if you want to do an anniversary thing for that, but at least leave the game up on the eShop. This next thing I want to talk about is very personal to me. So for those of you who have watched any videos on my channel, you probably know I'm a big Paper Mario fan, at least the first 3 games. Like, went from being a beloved RPG franchise with Paper Mario and Thousand Year Door, and of course Super Paper Mario, which still was an RPG, even if it wasn't exactly like its predecessors. But after Super Paper Mario, there was a deliberate decision by Nintendo to dumb down the series. Like, the first 2 Paper Mario games were content-rich RPGs, like great battle systems, interesting stories, even though the first story wasn't the greatest, but gets a pass for being the game that started the series. But then Thousand Year Door came out and is widely considered to be one of the greatest RPGs in video game history, not just Mario history. Super Paper Mario still did a lot of things that fans of the original 2 games loved, but when Sticker Star came out in 2012, things took a turn for the worse. Nintendo, specifically producer Kensuke Tanabe, has openly admitted what happened. They removed most RPG elements and heavily restricted story and characters, essentially to keep the games closer to the Mario universe. In an interview, Tanabe said that Super Paper Mario's elaborate story led the game away from the Mario universe, so since Sticker Star, he avoids stories that are too complicated. He also revealed a shocking mandate that I hope is gone by now. Like, this article is a few years old now. But anyway, since Sticker Star, they can't modify existing Mario characters or create original characters that touch on the Mario universe. That's why recent Paper Mario games feature generic toads, bland locations, and just stripped down RPG elements like a bare bones story, no XP, no traditional leveling. This was just incredibly dumb because it threw away what made the series special. Each new Paper Mario after TDYD got flack. Like, Super Paper Mario got flack too, but a lot of fans still did love it. But Sticker Star is just so reviled by many fans. Color Splash is a little more popular, but a lot of people have issues with that. Origami King isn't hated, like, it definitely has fans, but for fans of the original 2 to 3 games, the series has just been stripped of what it once was. But at least we got the Thousand Year Door remake in 2024, so that leads me to believe Nintendo's at least moving in the right direction. And say what you will about Mario and Luigi Brothership, but it did have unique locations and characters, so I'm hoping that mandate I mentioned is done. There's no localization saga more infamous than Mother 3. Nintendo's refusal to ever release Mother 3, the sequel to Earthbound, in the West is just a running joke in the Nintendo community, and Nintendo themselves have joked about this at E3 2015. Mother 3 came out in 2006 on the Game Boy Advance in Japan, and fans have begged for Nintendo to localize it for years, and Nintendo's response? Crickets. Actually, worse than crickets, because they've had teases like the E3 skit I mentioned. So why was it dumb that Nintendo left Mother 3 Japan only? Because it was just simply Nintendo ignoring a passionate fan base. This was a critically acclaimed RPG by Shigesato Itoi, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, and by not bringing it over or releasing it on Virtual Console, Nintendo essentially pushed fans into playing via fan translation, which they did, and an excellent fan translation came out in 2008. Nintendo finally gave us an explanation, well, sort of years later. In 2022, 16 years after the game came out, former Nintendo of America president Reggie Fils-Aimé revealed that the decision was purely business. By the time Mother 3 released in 2006, the Game Boy Advance was on its way out, and the Nintendo DS had taken over, so the company didn't want to spend resources localizing a GBA game. He emphasized it had nothing to do with the game's quirky or potentially controversial content. It was just not seen as worth the effort. And okay, I get the logic on paper, but here's why it's still dumb. Earthbound, also known as Mother 2, had a cult following in the West, and not capitalizing on that was leaving money and goodwill on the table. Over the years, the mystique of Mother 3 only grew. Like, every E3 or Nintendo Direct, fans would speculate, like, maybe it's this time, only to be brutally disappointed. Like, basically, it's like Valve fans hoping for Half-Life 3. Also, Nintendo actually localized Mother 1, also known as Earthbound Beginnings here, but they still haven't localized 3. Like, this doesn't have the most disastrous impact on Nintendo, just a head-scratching decision. Like, the game has been out for nearly 20 years now, and there's still not an official translation. Like, the only way to play this is just the fan translation, so Nintendo's not making any money from that. And you can play this on the Switch, all you have to do is make a Japanese account, which isn't difficult. But it's still not localized. It's a Japanese only game. Like, you're gonna tell me that Nintendo can't spare some resources to just get the game in English? Like, it's not like a fully voice acted game or anything. It's a GBA game. Technology transitions are tricky, but Nintendo absolutely fumbled the jump to CDs in the mid-90s. While the competition, being Sony's PlayStation and the Sega Saturn, embraced CD-ROMs, Nintendo released the Nintendo 64 in 96, sticking to old school cartridges. The decision was born of some logic. Cards had faster load times and were harder to pirate, but the downsides were massive. Cartridges had far less storage capacity and were more expensive to produce than CDs. The dumbest consequence of this decision was Nintendo alienated key third-party developers, most notably Square, the makers of Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy VII was originally planned for the N64, and early tech demos even existed, but the game Square envisioned was just way too ambitious for a 64MB cartridge. When Nintendo announced the N64 would be cartridge-based and not CD, it was like the floor caved in for Square. Like, Square realized their passion projects simply would not fit on a cartridge, and they refused to bring it down in quality or scope. So what did they do? They took Final Fantasy VII to Sony PlayStation on the CD-ROM, where it became one of the biggest, most legendary RPGs of all time. And it was exclusively on Nintendo's rival platform. And this wasn't just a one-game loss, it signaled Square and many other developers shifting support towards PlayStation. Nintendo's then president, Hiroshi Yamauchi, was so enraged he basically banished Square from Nintendo platforms, for a long while anyway. By insisting on cartridges, Nintendo lost the entire Final Fantasy series for over a decade, and many other third-party titles that flocked to CD-based consoles. The Nintendo 64 had great games, sure, but largely from Nintendo itself and a handful of others. The era of RPG dominance happened on PlayStation, not Nintendo, and it was largely because of this decision. The impact can't be overstated either. Sony gained a huge edge in software library and developer relationships, and it contributed to PlayStation's victory over Nintendo 64 in the console wars. Nintendo eventually learned their lesson, well, kind of. The GameCube moved to mini DVDs, which was still an issue for similar reasons, but by then the damage was done. This might be one of the most costliest, dumb decisions in gaming history, just like the first thing I covered in the video. Nintendo essentially said the faster load times and difficulty piracy were worth giving up all this third-party support. You know, if Nintendo went with CDs on the Nintendo 64, gaming landscape could look a lot different nowadays, because this is basically how PlayStation was able to get dominant in the console market. For a company known for innovation, Nintendo has been hilariously behind the times on online multiplayer and features. features. This is less one single event and more a series of just baffling decisions that showed Nintendo in a time warp where the internet only kinda sorta exists. Let's highlight some of Nintendo's online ineptitude. While Xbox Live and PlayStation Network let you add friends by a simple username search since the mid-2000s, Nintendo insisted on 12-digit numerical friend codes as the way to add friends. Want to play Mario Kart with a buddy? I hope you know your codes. Nintendo claimed this was for simplicity and safety. They thought choosing a unique username might be too hard or uncomfortable for players, so instead they made you dig out a random 12-digit code to add someone. It's so much more comfortable to input SW674161936921 than to type like CoolGamer87, right? No, it's not. The friend code system has just been clunky and outdated for a very long time, yet Nintendo stuck with it from the Wii through the 3DS era before finally having usernames on the Wii U you could add. But then they went back to them on the Switch and Switch 2, like you can't make this up. Also, before Switch 2, there wasn't even a proper party chat system on any Nintendo system. The closest thing we had was like the Switch app or the FaceTime thing on Wii U. The Switch 2 still lacks messages, and you can't really view much on friends' profiles outside of recent games. Like there's no achievements, no sharing screenshots, no sharing videos, and it's just missing so much. Oh yeah, and going back to the topic of voice chat, I mentioned there was the Nintendo Switch app, and yeah, instead of just plugging your headset into your console to talk to friends, you would have to connect it through the smartphone app. This was just beyond dumb. It just requires a convoluted setup. Your Switch, your phone running the app, possibly a splitter dongle to feed the game audio and chat into one headset. It's like Nintendo asked, how can we make this less convenient? Then there's also basic features like cloud saves, unified accounts, cross-game party invites, or even achievement systems, like things competitors implemented in the 2000s were slow to arrive or just entirely absent on Nintendo platforms. They did introduce some cloud saving with NSO, not for all games, but it was still subpar. And let's not forget the Wii and DS era. Like those had online play, but it was primitive, and shutting down those servers was just a huge letdown. The impact of Nintendo's online backwardsness is that for years playing multiplayer on Nintendo systems felt stuck in a past era. Smash Bros fans dealing with laggy matches, Mario Maker 2 releasing without the ability to play with friends initially, and the ongoing annoyance of just everything else like the friend codes. Nintendo has improved slightly, like with the Switch 2 having a dedicated game chat button, but their paid service is just so far behind Xbox Live and PSN. Like the dumb decision in summary is Nintendo seemingly chose to ignore the standard online innovations and just try to reinvent the wheel in the weirdest ways, and it never needed reinventing. Like sometimes you can just copy what works, it's fine. You don't need to act like you're stuck in 2005. Now let's take a look at a hardware blunder that is almost charming in its goofiness. The Game Boy Micro. Announced in 2005 after the Nintendo DS had already been launched, the Game Boy Micro was a teeny tiny redesign of the Game Boy Advance. It's actually kind of cool looking, super small with interchangeable faceplates, but the timing and concept was just way off. To set the scene, the Nintendo DS came out in late 2004 and was marketed as the future. Like it was initially called a third pillar, but clearly was replacing the GBA. Nintendo did the same thing with the 3DS and the Switch. By 2005, the DS was gaining momentum, so what does Nintendo do? They released the Game Boy Micro in late 2005. It was a GBA that could only play GBA games, no backwards compatibility with original Game Boy or Game Boy Color games. Just has a teeny 2-inch screen. Essentially, it's a feature-reduced GBA, but in a shiny micro package. And again, they released it after the DS was already on shelves. Unsurprisingly, consumers just asked, why would I buy this? The micro flopped hard, only selling around 2.5 million units worldwide. And it was noted that the DS was only $30 more than the micro and could play all DS games as well as GBA backwards compatibility. The DS had a larger screen, more features, and of course was the new fad. The micro, on the other hand, had no backwards compatibility, meaning it played fewer games than the GBA SP that people already had. It was basically for people who said, I want a Game Boy but smaller, and I don't care about older games or screen size. That's not a huge market. Nintendo's marketing for the micro was nearly non-existent. Perhaps they themselves didn't know who it was for. Internally, I suspect the micro existed before they had a fancy design and thought they could milk a little more out of the GBA platform, but releasing it after the DS just made it DOA. Most of the intended audience had moved to the DS, and those who hadn't were probably fine with their existing GBA SPs. In retrospect, the Game Boy Micro feels like an odd footnote, product that should have been a neat limited edition novelty at best, not a major launch. Nintendo's dumb move was thinking it would be a good idea to push an essentially obsolete system in a new form. Like there was no fixing this. It quietly tapered off until it faded away. This wasn't the last time Nintendo did something like this either. They released the Wii Mini around the release of the Wii U, and it lacked Wi-Fi connectivity and had a top-loading disk drive, and of course had no backwards compatibility. Then the new Nintendo 2DS XL, which actually is a really great system and probably the best 3DS system if you don't care about 3D, but it came after the release of the Switch, which greatly hurt sales. For years, years, one of the best things about Nintendo's platforms, whether it was the Wii, 3DS, Wii U, was the Virtual Console. It was the digital shelves where you could buy classic games for just a few bucks. Like if you wanted Super Metroid on your 3DS, $8, download it, and it's done. It wasn't perfect, but it was pretty great for retro enthusiasts. Then the Wii U even got Wii and DS Virtual Console, which was really cool since that was only the previous generation. Enter the Nintendo Switch in 2017, and Nintendo decided to not continue Virtual Console on Switch. Instead, they moved to a subscription model where you get a curated selection of older games as part of your yearly fee. You know, on paper, Switch Online's retro library is a nice perk for subscribers, and actually is very much worth the price in my opinion. But here's why Nintendo's approach is just a dumb move for consumers. They completely eliminated the option to buy and own specific classic games. Like, it's Nintendo Switch Online or nothing at this point. And fans asked, like, why can't we have both? Why can't we just buy the games we want if we don't want to keep subscribing? And Nintendo's unspoken answer is because they want to lock you into the subscription. Nintendo's goal is clearly to drive users to NSO because a one-time $5 purchase of an NES game isn't as lucrative long-term as keeping people paying $20 a year for NSO or $50 for the expansion pack. From a business perspective, I get it. Recurring revenue is good, one-time purchases are less good. But from a fan perspective, it feels incredibly anti-consumer and short-sighted. By killing the Virtual Console, Nintendo removed our ability to selectively buy classics, and this now risks the future availability of these games, since subscription libraries can lose games over time due to licensing, and we've even seen this happen. But no, Nintendo thinks it's smarter to funnel us into an all-or-nothing service. It's just a dumb, tone-deaf move because it ignores that a hybrid approach could please everyone. Other companies do it, like you can subscribe to Xbox Game Pass and still buy games individually on Xbox. Nintendo, however, essentially said, we know you rebought these games on Virtual Console before, but on Switch you'll subscribe and like it. This just led to a lot of resentment, especially among diehard retro fans who were really big into Virtual Console and willing to buy them again on Switch. Like the NSO service started slow, it just had a handful of NES titles at first, and while it's improved, like SNES, N64, Genesis, I know GameCube games were added, now that and a couple other systems are part of the extra expansion pass paywall, so it doesn't cover what Virtual Console offered. Someday the Switch servers will shut down and there will be no way to play these games anymore on the system. I think the subscription model is actually a very smart move by Nintendo, and I personally like it because it allows me to play more games I otherwise wouldn't have bought. But for someone who maybe just wants a few games or actually wants to own it, they're just completely out of luck here. When the Nintendo Switch launched in 2017, it had only 32 gigabytes of internal storage. Let that sink in, 32 gigabytes. By 2017, games like Doom or NBA 2K on Switch were larger than that, meaning you literally could just not download some latest games onto a brand new Switch without additional storage. It was an insanely conservative choice by Nintendo. They were trying to keep the Switch's price down, sure, but 32 gigabytes was laughably small even at launch. Switch owners quickly became familiar with buying a micro SD card, or 2 or 3. In fact, the first accessory anyone would recommend to a new Switch owner was get a memory card. This was dumb on multiple levels. Firstly, it just made the out-of-the-box experience for a Switch owner worse. You couldn't just start building a digital library without extra purchases. Download a couple of big games and there goes the internal storage. For example, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild takes up around 13 gigs. Dragon Quest Heroes was infamously large on the available internal space. LA Noire has a physical cartridge but required a 14 gigabyte download, and it's nearly half the system storage. And this just caught a lot of unaware buyers off guard. Basically, 32 gigabytes meant the Switch's internal memory could hold, like, I don't know, one AAA game, maybe a few indie games before it's full. Compare this to other consoles at the time. The PS4 in 2013 came with 500 gigs, Xbox One same deal, and now those are home consoles, not hybrids. But even the Steam Deck, a more direct parallel being a handheld PC, starts at 64 gigs and goes up to 512, and the 64 one was heavily criticized. Nintendo eventually acknowledged this, kind of, by releasing the Switch OLED in 2021 with 64 gigabytes. Still small, but I guess less laughable. Yet they continued to sell the base Switch with just 32 gigabytes all the way through its life. For all these years of the Switch, this was the standard. Even with the game file sizes increasing, all you had to invest in a memory card. It's just such a self-inflicted limitation. Like, sure, many people like myself just buy physical cartridges because we prefer physical media, but even those often have big patches or don't have the entire game on the cartridge. Like, the first thing a Switch owner sees when they try to download a big game is probably an error message about storage, and that's not the experience you want to give customers. In my opinion, this was just a dumb mistake by Nintendo because they saved a few pennies and caused a million headaches. And now I get what Nintendo's doing. It's not entirely dumb that they want to sell memory cards, but I think even if they made 64 gigs, that would have just been better. That people still would have had to buy memory cards, but there wouldn't have been as much backlash. And of course, the Switch 2 released this year with 256 gigs of storage, and while that's still a fraction of the 1 terabyte you get on competitors' consoles, it at least will give you flexibility with your storage. So it does seem like Nintendo did learn their lesson. And the final thing I want to talk about in this video is a gameplay mechanic so hated that Nintendo abandoned it in subsequent games due to fan backlash. I'm referring to the everyone in one car mechanic from Mario Party 9 and 10, and if you miss these entries, you might be puzzled, because a car in Mario Party? Let me explain the background. For all of you who have played Mario Party, which is probably 99% of you watching this video, it's just a virtual board game where players roll dice and move independently around the board, and strategize routes to get stars, avoid hazards. It's competitive, it's chaotic, it's fun, but for Mario Party 9, which came out at the end of the Wii era, some genius at ND Cube, not Hudson Soft, who worked on the previous games, decided to reinvent the formula. They put all 4 players together in a car, moving along the board as a group. Players took turns being the captain who hits the dice, but everyone moved the same distance in the same vehicle. The result was no one had their own path. You all traveled the board in tandem, and Mario Party 10 repeated this formula. To put it mildly, fans hated it. The criticism was, and still is, that the car mechanic completely removes strategy and player agency. When everyone is stuck moving together, you can't execute your own plan. Like, you can't go a different route to snag a star or avoid a Bowser space. You're at the mercy of who's ever driving the car and random dice rolls from other people. It also reduces the tension of the game. In classic Mario Party, like the first 8 entries, you might be laughing as you're 5 spaces away from a star while your buddy is 20 away, and you're hoping they land on a Bowser space. In 9 and 10, that dynamic is gone. You're just all in it together in a bad way. Even the mini stars mechanic just didn't land well, and the impact of this was Mario Party 9 and 10 sold far worse than earlier entries. Like, for example, Mario Party 8, which was Mario Party 9's predecessor both on the Wii, sold around 8 million, Mario Party 9 sold around 3 million, Mario Party 10 2 million, and now some of that is due to console install bases, but a lot of Mario Party fans simply skip these because of negative word of mouth. Nintendo did fix this eventually by ditching the car mechanic entirely in future games, and we are finally headed in the right direction. Like, I think Mario Party Jamboree and Mario Party Superstars were really fun Mario Party games, so it seems like this era is in the past now, and this is a good example of Nintendo making a dumb decision and at least fixing it at some point. Like, I get Nintendo wanted to freshen up the formula, and they did that in Mario Party 9, but it was clear people didn't like this, and they just brought it back in 10. Like, I just don't know what they were thinking. And there we have it. Those are just a handful of dumb decisions Nintendo's made. Now, you could argue some of these weren't dumb by a business perspective, but remember, for a business, they don't want to unnecessarily make people hate them. They don't want people to boycott them. They want people to spend their money. And when you make anti-consumer decisions that just don't make any sense, you just have to question why they're doing it. So a lot of these issues have been fixed, but a lot of them are still big issues. And there's a lot more things I could cover. Like, if you have any ideas for things you'd maybe want to see in a part 2 of this, let me know in the comments. And if you did enjoy this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and consider joining my Discord and becoming a channel member for just a couple bucks a month. Thank you for watching Domainy, and I'll see you next time.